Passing on to Colossians. Now remember, that hymn predates the Gospels, the written Gospels that we have. Mark was written maybe around 65 to 70. Paul wrote the letter to the Philippians between 54 and 58. He is citing a pre-existing song, a hymn, so it's got to be, you know, at least one would think of maybe a few years before, maybe in the late 40s, so we're getting closer to Jesus. I mean, this is interesting, because if Jesus were transformed into a God, which is a theory, I'm not denying the theory, we can discuss it, it must have happened really quick, because the rudiments are already there. Colossians. And I've got my map. Colossae in Greece, rather than Turkey, I forget. God bless you. I forget where Colossae is. Let me check my Google thing. Google Maps. Nice. Wikipedia. Yeah. They want money. Please help. I mean, they want money. I mean, they're doing it for free if you can, you know, that's nice. Oh, they don't have Phrygia. Ooh, the Meander, so it is in Turkey, but where is it in Turkey? Ooh, Ephesus. Oh, okay, I know where it is now. Whoops. Current slide. Okay. It is in Turkey. Phrygia is right here. Ephesus is around here. There's a conglomeration of cities and towns here to which Paul wrote some letters. Laodicea. We don't have the letter to the Laodiceans, unfortunately. But Colossae is in here, Ephesus is in here. So this area is where Colossae is. So it's in modern-day Turkey. Okay? Colossians, scholars are divided about 50-50 on whether Colossians was written by Paul or not. Oh, let me mention this before I move on to Colossians. 3 interesting points we want to say about Philippians, the Christ hymn, that you want to write down. First of all, the fact that Jesus is Messiah. Okay, you find a basic Christology here, a basic understanding of Jesus. Okay, first of all, he's the Messiah. He's called Jesus the Christ in the hymn. So that affirmation of Messiah is there. Go ahead. Yes, we're back on this. I looked at my notes, I forgot these 3 things I wanted to say. Jesus is divine. He's godlike. He's godlike. Once again, just like with the Papyrus Oxyrhynchus, Father, Son, and Spirit. Did early Christians understand fully what they meant by saying or implying Jesus is God? Probably not fully. Okay? But they knew that somehow Jesus was a human man who had divine qualities. Okay? But not like Hercules or the Titans, Perseus. You know, he wasn't like half God, half human. He was like fully human, yet he was fully God. But anyway, that's something that the church is going to have to figure out later. But the fact that Jesus is divine, he's called Lord, and the fact that he's the Son of God, because God is called the Father. So it implies a child relationship with Jesus. Okay, so those are 3 things. He's Messiah, he's Lord, divine, and he is God's Son, because God is Father. Now, as I said, Colossian scholars are divided about 50-50. 50% would say this is not from Paul. 50% would say it is from Paul. I would say it is from Paul, only because I don't think the arguments saying it's not from Paul are really that strong. Usually the arguments for the letters that scholars will say were not written by St. Paul the Apostle come down to language, the use of different terminology and stuff like that. Okay, that's fine. If anyone who knows, the way I wrote when I was in my teen years or in my 20s is not the way I write now. I've learned, and I've actually changed the way I write by what I've been doing. I used to write certain ways, and sometimes I've reverted to older ways of writing. The way I used to write certain things, because I like to be more traditional sometimes. And we know that Paul used secretaries. Whatever. I'm not going to get into the whole thing. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm just trying to explain to you why I would tend more towards thinking that it comes from Paul. Whether he wrote it physically with his own hand is another question, or used somebody else, And how do you know? How do you know? You have no, what do they call it? You have no control, from in science. You need a control. You need something to compare your results to know if your results are valid or if they're just coincidental or if they mean anything, And you don't have any control. We don't have a writing that we know is absolutely from beginning to end written by the hand of St. Paul the Apostle, and then we can compare it with these. We don't. So in a lot of ways it's guesswork. But you need to know this because the truth, about 50% of scholars would say yes, 50 would say no. Take it for what it's worth. If it was written by Paul the Apostle, it would be written, it can be dated somewhere to around 63 AD. 63. So just a few years before he died. Circa 63. Could have been before, could have been a little bit after. And what's the date if it was not by Paul, if it was written by a disciple of Paul, 70 to 80. So it's still not that late. 70 to 80 AD, sometime. So take your pick. Anytime from the early 60s until 80 AD is a pretty good pick for when this letter was written by whomever it was written, Paul or somebody else in the name of Paul. Okay, but still, it contains a hymn. It contains evidence. It was written by clearly a Christian believer, and in the process of writing his letter, he cites what appears to be a Christian hymn. Hopefully you have read it, so I'm not going to go over reading it, and I don't want to waste time reading it again if you've read it. Hopefully you have read it. If you haven't, take a look at it, okay? He is the image of the invisible God, Acon, this idea of it, like icon. That's where the word icon comes from on your computer. You took it from the Greek. Icon just means a picture, an image. That's all it means. Icon means image, like a picture. So Jesus is like a snapshot of the invisible God. Why would it say the invisible God? Why would it say he's a snapshot? Because he was in the flesh. He was visible. Once again, you see this kind of undercurrent of godliness to Jesus. God is invisible, but Jesus we can see. So that's his difference. What's his difference with the invisible God? He's visible. He's the visible God. Father is the invisible one. Jesus, because the Father did not come in the flesh. The Son came in the flesh. So he's an image of God. Also, remember Judaism. They know their story. Okay, the name. Jesus is given the name. Jews pick up on that. The fact that Jesus is the image of God. If you read the book of Genesis, hopefully you took a look at it. What does it say about Adam and Eve? What does it say about Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, Mr. Ulrich?
That they were formed in God's image.
And?
They
Now you're set. You're halfway there. Good. No, that's good. Don't shake your head because it's good. Adam and Eve were made in the image. Excuse me. Coffee makes me burp. I don't know why. Only when I'm here. Only when... Well, wait a second. You got a sweater shirt, a sweatshirt, and a jacket. No gloves? No. God bless you. The image and the, go ahead. Likeness of God. Two words are used there in the Hebrew. Image and likeness, which we could get into more deeply, but we're not. Or maybe we will. The image, Mr. Mondiello. Where's it? Tselem, I think it's in Hebrew. Tselem is the word for image. A tselem was could also be used like an idol. Of idols. Images. You know, you'd make a tselem, a physical image of the God you wanted to worship. Okay? So interesting. Men and women are in the image of God. They're Flamim, the plural. They're images of God. This is interesting because that's a difference in the book of Genesis, if you want to write this down, from surrounding religions. Women were not on an equal measure as a man, okay? But here we see in the first chapter of Genesis, God creates both men and women, male and female human beings, both in His image with no distinction. With no distinction. They are both images of the eternal God. When we get to Genesis chapter 2, which is actually has connection to the older Middle Eastern traditions of creation, you'll see what I'm talking about. Referring to men and women, okay? This is how women are kind of less than men. But even that image has changed. But they're equal. They're both images of God. But notice the difference. In the hymn, is Jesus said to be in the image of the invisible God? Mr. Allen. Does it say He is in the image of the invisible God? It does? It does? That's what the hymn says? It says that? Does it say that? It does say that? Mr. Ulrich?
I think it's something with God's life, but there's still distance between Him and God.
I love you people. Mr. Willens. And we got, and here we go. We're off and running, baby. Hold your question, please. Gentlemen, you're thinking too much. Don't think. That's not what this class is about. I don't want you to think. All right? I mean, Ms. Harrison, you know what I want? I want to set up my own little commune in Guyana with all of you there, and you'll all take care of me, and you'll worship me. And you'll record everything I do, and if I give you something to drink, you'll drink it. Not ask any questions. That's my... Yeah. You know what's really creepy? They have the final tape online. You can get the tape of the final. They taped the last thing where he was handing out the drink. And it's really creepy. Anyway, and the guy had a real weird voice. He had like this lispy kind of weird voice. Not that a lisp is that bad. I've got kind of a lisp, but you know, whatever. Don't read anything into it. Anyway, what does it say, sir? Does it say he is in the image of the invisible God? Where? Where does it say that? It says, Miss Harrison. Thank you, Miss Harrison. Thank you for bringing sanity to the room. You have to read what you see. It does not. There's a difference. There's a word missing. Human beings are made in the image and likeness of God. But the hymn doesn't say that. He says He is the. There's a one-to-one equation. He's the image of God. We're in His image, God's image and likeness. What does that mean, Mr. Willems? Who knows? Don't know. We're like God. Yeah. And not only does it say in the image, but it qualifies it by saying and likeness. Gamuth is another Hebrew word. Gamuth means to be like. Okay? So we're not even human beings just to qualify, because this word Salem can be misinterpreted. Does that mean we're God in the flesh too? Like we're images, idols of God, you know? Like, no. We're not divine spark in flesh. Okay? It's making very clear that it's qualifying it. An image and likeness. So you're not God, but you're like God. What does that mean? Rabbis and Christian theologians for a long, long time have thought about what that meant, what that means. Because we know what the words mean. But what does God mean? As I told you, a Salem, which usually could be used of an idol, okay? Instead of an idol that you would make of God. Gamuth is a likeness. And, Christians and Jews have interpreted it like in the sense of your God's image, not literally God's image, okay, because we're not gods, but as creatures created by God. And how are we like God? We're like God in our faculties of reasoning, of will, that we can choose things, goodness, that we can choose the good, stuff like that. So they look at it more as a philosophical way. Okay? Biblically, in the biblical mindset, they probably had more of a materialistic view of things and probably would have looked at it, I'm guessing because I did not live back then, but we just know from the way biblical thinkers thought, they thought very materialistically. They didn't think like philosophy in that way. Salem, you are a direct creature of God. God fashioned us physically, so we're like idols that God made in a way. So God fashioned us and created us. But we're not God. We're like God in the sense that we have life. We have the breath of life in us. All right? So, a different mindset. Neither one of them is necessarily wrong, okay? And if you push either one of them too far, you can maybe get into some problems, but you kind of have to bring them together, all right? So image, He is the image, the firstborn of all creation. Connection again with Genesis, the creation story. A rivet story. But He's the firstborn of all creation. So He's before. I mean, that is an interesting term, I give you the Greek, don't worry about it. The firstborn of all, actually, literally, it could be the firstborn of all creatures. Of all creatures, they translate it creation, but of all created things. Once again, this is early days. So what do they mean by this? That Jesus was created as well? He was created first as a divine creature? I don't know. I'm throwing that out there. I don't know exactly what they mean totally by that. But the fact that they want to say that Jesus is first before everything. Okay? And He was involved, there's involvement in creation. And we see this a little bit more if you read when we get to John chapter 1, where it explicitly says Jesus created everything. God created everything through the Son. Okay, so we have this reference to the creation. Okay? For in Him were all created things in heaven and earth, the visible, okay, blah, blah, blah. Thrones, dominions, principalities, powers. Okay? If you've been listening to the new translations at Mass, Torres, have you been listening? Or you're kneeling there going, works. I want to do sometimes. Anyone listening to the new translation? No? They did? No, not necessarily. In some cases they do have a little bit of Latinization, but more for accuracy if you compare the previous translation. So, yeah, and you can see this online. You can go just do a search online. There are plenty of sites where they will show you side by side what the Latin says and the translation of it, and then what we had, which was nonsense. And there was a whole bunch of, whether you agree with the ideology or don't agree, there was ideology involved. For example, the translators would not translate words like grace and soul, sin, because they thought these were outdated notions. And so if they occurred in the prayer, they just wouldn't translate them. They translate grace like to love or something like that. Which is okay, there's whatever, but that wasn't their job. And finally in the 90s, the Vatican had enough. And finally, it took them 30-some years, but they intervened and completely disbanded the committee and set up a new committee, which Bishop Saratelli of Patterson, Diocese of Patterson, was on and is on, and which is good because he's a biblical scholar, and so he knows languages, and so I can see his work. And he was involved in the revised edition of the Old Testament in your Bible. Not perfect, but, Anyways, where are we going with that? If you listen to the Eucharistic prayer, actually the preface to the Eucharistic prayer, with the Lord be with you and also with you, lift up your hearts, and with your spirit, lift up your hearts and lift them up to the Lord. Let us give thanks to the Lord our God. It is right and just to do so. The priest will say it is right and just, and then you usually have a little ditty, theological ditty about, it's Advent time, so it'll be expressing some mystery or some idea of Advent that the church wants you to think about or give thanks to God for, like, Jesus coming, etc. and so forth. And then, we praise God with all the thrones and dominions of it. Well, listen to it, it's there, okay? Because it's in the Latin. And of course, a lot of people... Twisted my wrist the wrong way. But I got it down. I hurt my wrist some months ago and it's still tender. But what are they referring to? They're referring to this biblical, these references to thrones and dominions, principalities and powers. These are levels of spiritual beings, like angels, is what it's talking about here. Okay, it's not referring to physical, political powers, like governments. It's referring, these are levels of angels. So the whole choirs of angels, even the spiritual powers, and that were created through Him, through Jesus, and for Him. Interesting that even God's angels are now His, and they were created for Him. Interesting. Kuriotetes, dominions. Actually, that word dominions, that's a little bit of a Latinization from Latin dominus, which means Lord. But kurios, which I told you a few moments ago, the lordly things. You could translate that. Thrones or lords, or that word principality. The word is just archai. Hard to translate archai. Archai means beginning. It can mean like a principle, like a principal thing. How do you just translate that as well? Like if you have an essential principle, a first principle, stuff like that. Archai. Powers is fine. And these ideas of lordship, notice, the lords, the beginnings, the powers, notice how they're going to filter down into the rest of the hymn. Okay? Skip over this, okay? He is the beginning. He's called Arche, beginning. Which is another meaning of this word for principalities. Okay? He is the rest of it. He is Lord. This is right, Lord. Anyway. He is called Lord in Philippians. He's called Lord in keep going, Mr. Gunn. They won't know this. Alright? He has power. Well, we'll get there when we get to pleroma. And also the power of creation, you could say. The power of creation. Because he created the heavens and the earth. Okay? Throne, which is translated properly, the word throne, on which to say king. Okay, so you see these textures of meaning that, yes, literally it's referring to these levels and ranks of spiritual creatures called angels, created by God. I mean, the only difference is that angels are spiritual; they don't have bodies. Okay, they're spiritual creatures, and that's probably where the UFOs come from. At least according to some books I've read by my born-again Christian friends. But what was I saying? But also there are deeper meanings. I mean, I don't think it's not for nothing that a throne is connected to a ruler. Jesus is claimed to be King, the Christ. Okay, this word Lord. He's beginning. He's the Creator, the power of creation by which God creates. But anyway, whatever. Moving on. All right, skipping on. He's the head of the body of the church. Ooh, that's interesting. So now we go from Christology to ecclesiology, theology of the church. It's not just about Christian and Catholic theology. It's not just me and Jesus. Ecclesiology. It's me and Jesus in the community of believers. I mean, I'm not just teaching you, you're teaching me. Which is true. I'm not just throwing that out there because I want, nice marks on your evaluation. No, but it is true. We're teaching each other. Not always in the same ways. We have different gifts. The bishop has a different gift than I do, and I have a different gift than you do, but we all have gifts and we're sharing them. And our head is the same. Christ. And the church is his body. Interesting, this idea of the church as the body of Christ. Sometimes wonder which part I am. I know which part some people are. If you want to take the image literally. But anyways, the body of the church. So now we have this idea coming in the hymn of the community of Christ. The church. The ecclesiology, the study of the church. Okay? So you cannot, at least from Catholic theology, disconnect Christ from his body, his church. The two go together. Beginning, I mentioned, firstborn from the dead is repeated. He's the firstborn again. But now, not just the firstborn of creation, but the firstborn of all the dead. The underworld. Okay? So that he might be preeminent. And just for those of you who might not know what that word preeminent means, just being first in rank. Okay? Or importance. Someone who is eminent is someone who is, honorable. Well, not honorable. You could say, well, esteemed, honored, maybe famous could be part of that. Eminent, noteworthy. These are all kind of synonyms for eminent. All right, and he is that. So he's not, Jesus is nothing, not just eminent, he's before that. He's above. He's in the language of the day, I hate saying it, but he's super eminent. I hate it. I love to, I love to look at fads of language, I mean, I watch these shows and it used to be everything was amazing. and now everything's super. I really had a tough time when everything was mad and crazy. Oh, he's mad, talented. I'm making mad money. Huh?
Louis C.K. and he talks about how people talk and how they go to the top shelf and like everyone's a genius. Like she's like, you know what I'm saying, like hey guys, I got a cup, just use another cup. You're a genius. Like people use the top one. They don't even
genius.
No
yeah. Well, considering how we've leveled everything down, yeah, everybody's a genius nowadays, you know. That's another word I'm getting tired of, dude. Because now everybody's a dude. Even girls are dudes. They're like, dude. I hear girls saying, dude. You know a dude is a dude, right? Wait, hold on a second. We got 2 minutes. What are you doing? You got 2 minutes. He's just smiling. He's bold. He doesn't even care. Oh, now he's getting it out. Okay, Mr. Pagnata, geez. Okay, just one last point, and then we'll finish for today. The fullness. This is an important one, so you want to note it down before you go. This idea of the fullness. Pleroma, full. You even get that sense from the word pleroma, those long vowels, okay? The fullness. This is interesting, because this is a philosophical term from Greece. Okay, so you see that Christians were using what they had to express what they believed, okay? They didn't have to reinvent the wheel. And the Greeks, and also other groups like the Gnostics, whom I've mentioned, use these terms like pleroma to talk about all the created entities that were kind of like between you and God. You know, God created the cosmos. So all the spiritual beings, all of creation. I mean, our English doesn't really do it fully justice. But you have to understand everything and anything that is in the spiritual realm and the physical realm is dwelling in Him, residing in Him, like you reside in a house. So it resides in Him, within Him. Interesting. How could that happen with some Jewish man in Palestine? I don't know. But join me for Christian Belief and Thought, and we'll find out. So, have a good day.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Glad to be with you. I'm finishing up a discussion of Colossians, and we'll go on to John chapter 1. Just getting myself settled here, getting my notes. Excuse me. Just tired. As I'm sure you are, of listening to me. But anyways, we got back to where I finished. Okay? Hold on just 1 second. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Alrighty. I just had to check it where I had stopped in the previous lecture. Ha! Okay, so it is recording my microphone. Good. Okay, we're on Colossians verse 17. I'm not going to keep you very much longer. I just want to hit the main points and let you go. Okay, let me just get my notes here. These are still Philippians. And my notes for Colossians. I thought I had notes also for John chapter 1, but I guess not. Maybe I just went from memory. Okay, well, Colossians 17. Okay, Christ is before all things, and in Him all things hold together. I give you the word there, sunestemi. I don't know why I put that there. I'd have to look that up. but things are kind of knitted together, constituted by him. Oh, that's why. I'm looking at my notes here. 18, that's a rather important statement. Jesus is the head of the body, the church. Okay? He is the head of the body, the church. Okay? You might be surprised to know that the Pope has a number of official, quote-unquote, official titles. The Pope has a whole list. Let's see. He used to be Patriarch of the West, but Pope Benedict recently dumped that one. I don't know why. Servant of the Servants of God is another one. Representative of Christ, Vicarius Christi, Vicar of Christ, is another one. Actually, I think Archbishop of Rome, or Metropolitan of Rome, something like that, but also Bishop of Rome is another one of his titles, etc. and so forth. Supreme Pontiff, okay, stuff like that. But never in the history of the Catholic Church, and nowhere in the official titles of the Bishop of Rome, has the Bishop of Rome ever been, or is ever called, the head of the Church. Because he's not. I mean, people might say, well, the Pope is the head of the Church on earth. Well, that's not even technically correct. Okay? The Pope is the head of the Church in Rome. He is the Bishop of the Church of Rome. Okay? And he has a primacy, a first place amongst all the bishops. Okay? But Christ is the head of the Church. It's the Church of Christ. It's not the Church of Pope Francis. Okay? And right, you see this affirmed explicitly in Scripture, right here in this hymn. Jesus is the head of the Church. Not the bishops, not the Pope, not me, not you, no, but Jesus. It always comes back to Jesus. He is the point of reference. Jesus is the beginning, the firstborn of the dead, so that in all things he himself might be preeminent. And I give you your definition of what that word means. To be preeminent means to be of first rank or importance. So as I just said about the Pope has a primacy. The Pope is preeminent amongst all the bishops of the Church. There is no one above him, because the belief is the Bishop of Rome has succeeded to the apostleship of St. Peter the Apostle. And also St. Paul the Apostle died in Rome, so that kind of seals the deal, if you want to put it that way. But especially Peter the Apostle. Because remember, Paul was not an apostle of Jesus. He became one later. He was made an apostle, but he wasn't chosen as an apostle by Christ. So, Jesus is preeminent in the Church, and in all things, actually. He's first in rank and importance, just as the Pope is preeminent amongst the bishops. It's interesting that Jesus is called the beginning. Well, the beginning of what? That's a good question. That Greek word arche, notice the long E, has a lot of meanings in Greek. It can mean a first principle. It can mean, beginning, of course. It can mean, like the primary thing. It can mean basically, but it has that sense of being first, being principle, or the most important thing above all. Okay, the foundation in a way. And so this is translated as he is the beginning, but the question is of what? What do they mean in this hymn? Well, we don't know, but it adds the firstborn of the dead. So Jesus was the first to come back from the dead. He's the first fruits, if you will, of the harvest of those who die. Jesus was the first to be raised from the dead, okay, resurrected by his Father. So maybe that's what it means. He's the beginning in the sense that he's the first one amongst all of us who will be raised from the dead. Okay, remember that Jesus, the Catholic Church teaches, and Christianity teaches, that we will all be resurrected. So it's not just Jesus, okay? Jesus paves the way for us. So he's the firstborn. So maybe that's what it means. He's the beginning. He's the foundation of our resurrection. So that in all things, even in death, even in the matters of life and death, Jesus should be first in rank and importance. No one should supersede him. No one should come before him. He is first above all, even in the matters of life and death, because he is the firstborn of the dead. Verse 19 is very interesting in relation to the nature of Christ, because it says, "For in him," in Jesus, "all the fullness was pleased to dwell." And this word fullness in Greek is to pleroma. To pleroma. To means the. Pleroma means full. Fullness. Okay, so that's an accurate translation. What is that? What is that? Well, it's very interesting. It's a very interesting word that's used here in this Christian hymn, because in ancient Greek philosophy, this idea, this term for the fullness was very specific. The fullness, the realm of the fullness, to pleroma, okay, was the realm of all spiritual entities. It was a philosophical and a religious term used in ancient Greek to describe the arena, the area, the reality, however you want to describe it, of all the spiritual beings that existed. It's called to pleroma, the fullness. Okay? I was looking for something. I thought I had it here with me, but anyways. So this is a very, very significant verse. And it's a very significant instance of the use of this term, because we know this term from its use in Greek religion and Greek philosophy. Okay? And now this term for the wholeness, the wholeness of the spiritual realm is being applied to Jesus. And it's saying that in him the fullness of the whole spiritual world resided. Okay? This is interesting because it was the belief in, I'm going to say more Greek philosophy than Greek religion, but in Greek philosophical terms, the spiritual realm contained all those kind of beings through which God related to the physical world, the universe. Okay? I'm talking about Greek philosophy here. Greek religion is different. But in the Greek philosophers believed that there was a divine realm, there was a God that existed, but that this God kind of related to the physical universe through beings in this pleroma, this fullness. Call them angels, call them spirits, call them whatever you want. Okay? But that's how the divine was able to touch, in a way, to enter into the physical world. There were some people who thought that that's what Jesus... There were some Christians even in the very early stages of the history of Christianity who thought that maybe that's what Jesus was. You know, because Jesus doesn't say he's the Father, he says he's the Son of the Father. And he says that he's been sent by his Father, i.e. God. So some people might have interpreted that to mean that, well, Jesus was part of the pleroma. He was part of this fullness. And, you know, he was sent into the world. That would have made sense to the Greek philosophical mind. But that's not what Scripture says. Or this hymn, which is now recorded in Scripture, says. Christians were not saying that Jesus was a part of the fullness which then came and entered into the world. They were saying that Jesus was all of it. That the whole spiritual realm was contained in him. He was not a piece of it that kind of broke off and came into the physical world. He was it. period. Verse 20 mentions the cross. So here we have a theory or an idea of salvation. Okay, it's telling you what Jesus did, what happened to him, and why it happened. Okay? So in him all the fullness of the spiritual realm resided. He contained it all. And through Jesus, to reconcile all things, making peace by the blood of his cross. It's kind of a difficult, it's kind of quirky translation here, a quirky kind of way, but it's a hymn, so people, this is meant to be like poetry. It's not, all the connections are not made clearly, but there does seem to be a connection being made between the fact that Jesus is the fullness of the whole spiritual world, and that through his coming into the world and the cross, he reconciled all things. So he's now not just reconciling the spiritual world with the physical world, but through his blood on the cross, this is the instrument of him doing that. That he, the fullness of all spiritual reality, was crucified in the flesh. This event reconciles, brings together both heaven and earth in a way. The things of heaven, the spiritual realm, and the things of earth, the physical world, in his own person, through his crucifixion. Okay? So there's really a lot theologically going on in these two verses, 19 and 20. There's a lot more I could say about it and we could get into, and people have gotten into, but I'm not going to get into. I'm just going to leave it right there for now.